U.S. Coast Guard retired. Lieutenant Krzenski served 27 years with the Coast Guard from 1977 to 2004. During his career, he quickly rose through the enlisted ranks, commanding 3 separate Coast Guard stations and 1 Coast Guard cutter. In addition, after being commissioned as a warrant officer and subsequently a lieutenant, he was assigned to the commanding officer of the Coast Guard station, Fort Pierce. He was assigned as the commanding officer of the Coast Guard station, Fort Pierce, and then Coast Guard station, New Orleans. Following September 11, 2001 attacks, he was reassigned to Coast Guard headquarters in Washington, D.C., where he worked for the Office of Both Forces as well as the Deepwater Acquisition Project. He was instrumental in the transition of the Coast Guard from the Department of Transportation to the newly created Department of Homeland Security. During his career, he successfully served on more than a dozen Coast Guard units, leading and managing Coast Guard men and women while performing the wide array of Coast Guard missions. Following his military career, he and his wife Susan settled in Central Florida, where he began a second career in 2005 with the City of Sanford, the Police Department. As the Police Department's Administrative Services Manager, he reports directly to the Deputy Chief of Police and is responsible for all administrative support, including budgeting, finance, grant writing, purchasing, policy development, accreditation, facility maintenance, and fleet management, as well as overseeing police records management. Since 2006, he continues to serve as an adjunct professor for Barry University. In addition, Lieutenant Krzenski is a U.S. Coast Guard licensed merchant marine captain who had previously operated the river ship Romance on weekends along the St. Johns River. He and his wife Susan have been married nearly 40 years. They have 1 son who is happily married and 3 grandchildren. Please welcome Lieutenant Jim Krzenski.
Something here I'll show you later. Mayor, commissioners, my fellow veterans, ladies and gentlemen, I am honored to be speaking with you today on such an important occasion. We are here this morning to honor our service members and to remember the sacrifices they have made and the courage they demonstrated in defending our country. By their actions, my fellow veterans are our most patriotic Americans. Veterans Day has its origins in an event that occurred 99 years ago today. On a Monday, November 11th, 1918, at the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month, an armistice was signed ending World War I. This terrible war to end all wars left 117,465 Americans dead and over 200,000 wounded. Our courageous veterans once again fulfilled their duty and helped bring peace to the world. The U.S. Armistice holiday was renamed Veterans Day and was first celebrated November 11th, 1954. As we know, the bold statement, the war to end all wars, became an unrealized dream. The preservation of our nation continues to directly depend on the sacrifices of the courageous 1% who choose to don our nation's uniforms and remain forever faithful to their noble oath to protect and defend our nation and its Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. The only thing separating our nation from becoming a mere footnote in the annals of history are ordinary men and women who continue to willingly commit themselves to accomplishing this extraordinary and honorable task. We all walk this earth, and then we are gone. I believe a higher spirit is calling those who are walking this earth commit to a life of service. It has been said that the roots of happiness grow deepest in the soils of service to others. I could not think of a more accurate example of this belief than the service provided by our military veterans. Throughout the years, there have been two factors that have inspired my military service. They have included not only the inspiring words conveyed by our leaders throughout history, but also the extraordinary and courageous deeds and sacrifices made by our veterans. I believe most of us would agree that some of the most moving and stirring words ever spoken by an American president occurred just a few months following a pivotal Civil War battle. On November 19, 1863, President Abraham Lincoln traveled to the small township of Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. Just a few months earlier, one of the bloodiest battles of the Civil War occurred at this location. The president was invited to Gettysburg to dedicate a veterans cemetery. A gentleman by the name of Edward Everett, who was considered our nation's best orator at the time, spoke for over 2 hours. When Everett concluded his long speech, President Lincoln slowly rose from his seat and began making a relatively short 2-minute speech that reaffirmed our forefathers' vision. The vision they created just 87 years earlier in 1776 when they signed the Declaration of Independence. President Lincoln did not only dedicate a veteran cemetery that day, but reinvigorated a war-weary nation with these profound words that have been imprinted on the very soul of America and continue to this day to have a direct impact on all of us, including our veterans. President Lincoln said, 77 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Now we are engaged in the great Civil War, testing whether that nation or any nation so conceived and so dedicated can long endure. We are met on a great battlefield of that war. We have come to dedicate a portion of that field as a final resting place for those who here gave their lives that that nation might live. It is altogether fitting and proper that we should do this. But in a larger sense, we cannot dedicate, we cannot consecrate, we cannot hallow this ground. The brave men, living and dead, who struggled here have consecrated it far above our poor power to add or detract. The world will little know nor long remember what we say here, but it can never forget what they did here. It is for us, the living, rather, to be dedicated here to the unfinished work which they who fought here have thus far so nobly advanced. It is rather for us to be here dedicated to the great task remaining before us, that from these honored dead we take increased devotion to that cause which they gave the last full measure of devotion, that we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. President Lincoln's powerful affirmation of our forefathers' vision planted the seeds which truly blossomed into a new birth of freedom, elevating our collective human spirit to rise far above all expectations. The nation burst at the seams with unprecedented innovations, changing the world for the betterment of all mankind. Just think about it for a moment. Within a few decades following President Lincoln's Gettysburg Address, Alexander invented the telephone. Thomas Edison invented the light bulb. The Wright brothers gave us the ability to fly. These few stunning inventions not only illuminated the world, but connected the entire human race like never before. Since our nation's beginnings, it has been the sacrifices of our veterans who have preserved this very special thing we call freedom. What is this thing we call freedom? It is the essence of America, fostering a place in which minds of all ages are able to flourish and be inspired to dream big dreams and to reach for the stars. It is a place where anyone who believes can conceive and achieve a future for themselves in the world that exceeds all human expectations. Freedom manifests itself in our relentless American spirit, energizing us to persistently improve upon ourselves and our unfinished nation. Through these efforts, confirming those veterans who paid the ultimate price for us did not, in fact, die in vain, but rather sustained the continuation of what has been called by more than one historian the last hope of mankind, our United States of America. While it is the Declaration of Independence, the U.S. Constitution, and the Gettysburg Address, which contain the bedrock principles and values of our beloved nation, it will always be our citizens who must keep them alive. Earlier this year, my wife Susan, standing right there with the white jacket on, and I were absolutely thrilled when our 5-year-old grandson Malachi proudly demonstrated his newly learned patriotism. With a big smile on his face, Malachi placed his right hand over his heart and proudly recited the Pledge of Allegiance for his grandparents. When I witness our young people, like my grandsons, proudly display their patriotism and prepared to carry the torch of freedom, I am convinced our veterans' sacrifices will never be forgotten, and our resilient nation will certainly have a long and bright future. In addition to the powerful words that have been passed down through us through history, there have been countless courageous acts of service and valor by our soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines, which have provided an abundance of inspiration. Today, I would like to share with you the stories of 2 Coast Guard veterans who went above and beyond the call of duty, providing examples of service which so accurately exemplify the Coast Guard core values of honor, respect, and devotion to duty. Before I share their stories with you, it should be noted that since its August 4th, 1790 inception, the U.S. Coast Guard, as the nation's 5th military service, has fought in every war our nation has been involved to this very day. During and in between these wars, your United States Coast Guard also performs a wide array of missions which protect people from the ocean and the ocean from people, and on a daily basis plays a vital role in maintaining our national security. The first Coast Guardsman's story I'd like to share with you occurred during World War II when Coast Guard signalman First Class Douglas Munro, on September 27, 1942, during the Battle of Guadalcanal in the South Pacific, enabled the safe evacuation of nearly 500 U.S. Marines who were pinned down and trapped by Japanese gunfire. Maneuvering his boat to a strategic position, he was able to block the gunfire, the deadly gunfire, and return fire with the boat's mounted .30 caliber machine gun. In protecting the Marines and exposing himself to the enemy gunfire, he was repeatedly struck. And before succumbing to his mortal wounds, his last words were, "Did they get off?" Douglas Munro was posthumously awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor. Just 3 years later, during the same war, on June 6, 1944, Coast Guard boatswain Marvin Perrette operated his Higgins boat landing craft on D-Day at Omaha Beach. And incredibly, less than 1 year later, on February 19, 1945, Marvin was in the South Pacific, this time transporting courageous U.S. Marines ashore at the Pacific island of Iwo Jima, where he survived his Higgins boat landing craft being shot out from under him by the enemy. While I was assigned as the commanding officer at Coast Guard Station New Orleans in 1999 and 2000, I had the distinct honor of meeting and befriending this courageous veteran who fought in both of these pivotal World War II battles. At the time I met Marvin, he was regularly traveling around the nation wearing his World War II Coast Guard uniform and sharing his experiences with school children across America. His story has been repeatedly featured on the History Channel and other documentaries. While assigned to Station New Orleans, I was also very fortunate to have had the opportunity to operate a replica of his landing craft on Lake Pontchartrain when it was completed. It then became the centerpiece of the New Orleans World War II Museum. Of the many courageous World War II veterans I was so very fortunate to have met throughout my Coast Guard career, my wife Susan and I certainly do miss boatswain Marvin Perrette, who passed away May 6, 2007, at the age of 81. Earlier this year, I received a very special gift from Police Lieutenant Greg Smith, standing right there. a co-worker of mine at the Sanford Police Department. He had just returned with his wife, Shannon, from a European vacation. Since receiving this gift, I have been increasingly thinking in awe about an 18-year-old Marvin Perret and his fellow courageous Coast Guardsmen and soldiers who stormed Omaha Beach, the beach where so many Americans sacrificed their lives. I have concluded that this special gift is more valuable to me personally than any piece of jewelry or other expensive material possession. You see, the small glass vial contains sand from Omaha Beach, right here in my hand. It is upon this very sand that thousands of courageous veterans made the sacrifice that resulted in the eventual freeing of Europe from fascism and ensuring the security of our nation and world. The sacrifices made by our veterans on this beach in subsequent World War II battles resulted in the Allied victory, and in the words of President Lincoln, with that victory, another extraordinary rebirth of freedom that enabled our great nation to begin mankind's exploration of space and leading our world into the information age, a journey that is still just in its earliest stages as we collectively reach for the stars. In closing, let us never forget our veterans and the sacrifices they have made to create and sustain our nation. Yes, of course, upon meeting a veteran, we can offer sincere thank you for their service. These kind words will always be appreciated. But that which warms my heart as a veteran is witnessing citizens cherishing their freedom by showing kindness, respect, and tolerance for one another, and understanding that the roots of our nation's strength is in our diversity. As a veteran, my heart is always warmed when I witness people cherishing our freedom by making the most of it, always striving to do the best at whatever we do, and treating others as they ought to be to help them become all they are capable of being. Lastly, as a veteran, my heart is always warmed when I witness Americans learning about our nation's history and ensuring that our nation's story and bedrock principles and values are communicated to our children. I have read that a nation that forgets its history will surely perish. Our generation must strive to remain the strong link in that long chain that not only binds us to the past and our ancestors' courageous sacrifices, but to the hopes and dreams of our children, our children's children, and all posterity. In my opinion, Prime Minister Winston Churchill's profound words to his citizens following the Battle of Britain so accurately reflect the sacrifices of our veterans, the 1% of our population who have made all of this possible. Churchill so eloquently stated, "Never in the field of human conflict was so much owed by so many to so few." Thank you for this opportunity to speak to you. May God bless our nation and all of our fellow veterans. Thank you.